Welcome to the Liberal Europe podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Silvestre, and thank you so much for listening to today's episode. For this conversation, we go back to an ELF publication, in this case, Policy Paper 29, from Soft Hard Power, several strategies for European liberals to prepare to defend their country and their continent. This was a joint work from our friend of the pod, Wojtek Budolski, and today I have the second co-author, which is Goran Buldioski. Goran is a senior fellow at the Hertie School, University of Governance in Berlin, and we go into the thesis of the policy paper and how to rethink the argument of investing in defense in a liberal framework. And after our main conversation, please stay to hear a little more about the path that Goran took before I got him in the podcast. But now, with no further ado, I bring you Goran Buldioski. I'm here with Goran Buldioski. Goran, thank you so much for coming to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you here, and with such an important policy paper that I have here in my hand, from soft to hard power, several strategies for European liberals to prepare to defend their country and their continent. And you co-wrote with Wojtek Budolski, which is a good friend of ours. And we're going to go into the policy paper immediately, because on page 3, and Goran, I must say that I was reading this and was one of those moments that everything stopped. There's a chilling conviction in Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran that Europe is a frail, crumbling relic fit only for scorn and domination. So these are your words. And then I thought it was very interesting because, on the other hand, I think it's also fair to say that Europe, it is stronger than sometimes we think. Please go a little bit into this concept.
Yeah, I mean, look, we wrote this a few months ago. We might have even added, not that we like to add it, but also Washington to that list.
Yes.
How Europe is treated from Washington. I mean, let's start with the other capitals. I mean, first with Moscow, because we listed that. We should take the people in Kremlin at their word. So, and their discourse for many years has been that we are in a proxy war with Europe and the West in Ukraine. Even if the rest of Europe maybe does not feel that way, I think it's important to ascertain what do they think. Mm-hmm. Second thing, in Beijing, Beijing was seen like, a competitor in the good times and maybe a partner, especially in the economic field. But more and more, if you see, the sort of the support that Beijing provided to Moscow in its effort to conquer Ukraine, and then if you see both the economic but as well the sort of the military policy of China, that's certainly not friendly. And I think, this is not to scaremonger. This is not to say, hey, wow, look at this. It's more to say, okay, let's take these people and the leadership in these places at their word, and then work and be prepared. And as you mentioned, I think there are reservoirs of that preparedness in Europe. There are reservoirs also on the societal front when it comes to military. Everybody praises the Nordics. Everybody praises the Baltic countries. I co-wrote the paper, as you mentioned, with Wojciech. Poland is one of the key sort of countries in Europe that made a dramatic turnaround, not only in spending, but also in the way how they think about the defense. So it's there. Nevertheless, I have to say, there's a lot to be said that, like, what of that is European? And unfortunately, less is European than we would like to see. And in particularly, less is European in the old way of a kind of federal thinking about Europe, of we gather, we agree, and then we pursue the common approach. And I have to say, at least from my part, this paper I wrote with the spirit, what can we do at the national level, and how that preparedness at national level then can contribute for an overall preparedness at the European level, without thinking of just only top-down solutions that will come from the Commission or other NATO or other bodies whose task is to centrally organize that response.
I had also a friend of our podcast. It's called Laika Merma. She studies China a lot. And she came into the podcast and she said the European Union should have military position regarding China and regarding Taiwan. we should invest in our military might. And I thought it was really, really interesting that she was clearly also saying we have the power and we just have to use it properly. So please stay a little more into that. What is this power that we're talking about in your view?
First, I just want to outline, like, the power is the power where there is a common joint action. And I know that this is a cliche, but often that cliche is really ending up with the lowest common denominator. And most of the time, everything is about what can I bring back to my voters, or what can I come home and say, okay, I'm a victor of these European conversations. And that means that actually everything becomes the lowest common denominator, and that is really that's a strategic and structural weakness that is explored by those who want to undermine European Union, because then eventually, the sort of the solidity of the European Union is as much as there is the weakest link. If each and every time the conversations about Ukraine are held at ransom by Hungarian Prime Minister, then actually we immediately go into that conversation into how we can pass the minimum that will satisfy Budapest. Or, I remember the times where actually, and this is like, we're talking economic, the crisis of 2010s, 2013, 14, when the Greek debt was so actual, and that was like billions upon billions. And then there you go, the Italian company signs a deal, which is good for them, for 3 billions with the Russian Gazprom and whatnot. But actually, if you think on the face value of that, and undermines the security of the rest of Europe, for literally at the time, that was the price of half a week of Greek debt. And I think that these are the issues where we, not only we, I would say that the key decision makers in some ways have to go past. We've done some work. I mean, there is a lot of central thinking. There are a lot of, with the putting money, with also looking at very good reports. Like, for example, the Ninisto report did not got the attention that the Letta and Draghi reports got, but I think it should be reread, and it's a very seminal and very comprehensive read. So actually, it's there. But the problem is, everybody goes to negotiate their own position. And I think this is also, I live in Berlin, in Germany. Of course, it's difficult. You have federal state, they have to agree, then they have to go to Europe to negotiate. But I have to say, this is also a mental position. And to me, the mental position is, how can we start thinking about maybe what will be in a short-term loss for me, but it will be a gain for the rest of Europe, and then will come back to me as a gain. And basically not to go to convince voters, but simply to persevere through that policy, especially for governments like the German one that just started and whatnot, that actually they can probably afford to be maybe unpopular on an issue or two, given that they will have a mandate of 4 years. But that requires a different mindset. That requires to say, you know what, deep down, I really know that your solution is better, even if it hurt maybe my part of my industry or part of my approach. Actually, let's go for it. Or let's start offering what will be my price to pay. Imagine if Germany doesn't go at these negotiations and says, oh, these are my positions and now I will negotiate what I will gain out of it. But to go and say, okay, this is what I'm ready to let go. And France says, this is what I'm ready to let go. And I'm not speaking about that they should not go and publicize this, but actually agree. Then the conversation will be different, and we will not fall for the lowest common denominator. So this is the sense that I have. Steps are made, to be fair, but I also think that those steps are made in a very centralized fashion, and we are not exploring. You mentioned subsidiarity. I think a lot of lip service is paid to it, but actually when it comes down to really doing stuff, then everybody goes on their own, and sort of at best they do something at local and national level, but they do not at the European level. At worst, nothing is being done, just a talk.
Goran, you are speaking my language. My heart is just like grow 3 sizes just listening to you right now, what you were discussing. And let's stick with that, because you mentioned we can have a little bit of hurt for a better outcome. And it's very interesting because going to page 6 to your policy paper, you make this very provocative thought and connects to what you're saying right now, which is us liberals, the Democrats, from center left to center right, we don't just go into this open-hearted and for a better future. Because then you say no nationalist politician also dares to campaign for armed conflict. So it's a duality, but at the same time, it's just interesting because it seems like there's this pattern, this holding pattern that no one wants to assume. And you say that there's an opportunity there. Please go into it.
Absolutely. Actually, that was the thing that motivated me to jump into this subject. Because if you look back at the European history, at moments like this, where Europe is threatened, or a given country is threatened, especially the big ones, what happens throughout European history is that you have a nationalist mobilization, and then you have a nationalist discourse in defense. And basically, a lot of national chauvinism driving this. Now, where do I think that the unique moment is in Europe? You don't have it here. And you don't have it for a very particular reason. You have the most of the radical right parties that are in the Russian appeasers camp. Mm-hmm. So actually for them politically at the moment that's not possible. So from AfD, Rassemblement National, from Fidesz, FPO in Austria, many others, they are not pursuing this. They're pursuing this in a very measured, stop and go mode, but not a full range because they're appeasers to Russia. And I thought, wow, what a unique opportunity for Europe, for European liberals to say, you know what, because they're not, and to be fair, probably national chauvinism in many places in Europe, and I say this with a great regret, would be easier to pursue. And some of the EPP members are actually doing, including Friedrich Merz in Germany, some overtones with this. But actually, what might be interesting is to go, and not only interesting in terms of, for me as a political scientist, but actually for politicians is to go sort of full-blown and say, wait a second, defense is also about defending our lives. It's defending about our way of life, and why do we appreciate that? And that actually can really work very well with the whole liberal and even social democratic understanding of society, and I think that's underexplored because actually then you fall a lot in these other debates, which is the debate of militarization. Well, I would actually really eliminate that from the lingo, because then immediately everything is about the guns and the money that we spend. I'm not saying that it's not important. It's super important. And some of those discussions have really progressed. Many countries have committed. A lot of them are starting spending the money, more successfully, less successfully. We'll see that. But that's gone. But I think what's necessary is to say, why are we doing this? And why are we doing this? Not because politicians will explain, but because people will feel that this is necessary. And exactly, Wojciech and I wrote this paper because in Poland, there was no need for explanation. While in Spain or Italy or France or Germany, still, actually, I would argue it's not about the explanation, but I would argue that there is a lot to define what is that people think that it's worth to defend, and the ways how to defend, which is much more than just conscription, which is much more than just buying the next tank.
Fantastic, Goran. Let's then shift to solutions. In the policy paper, 3 clusters are presented in a way to make this then not only be more acceptable, but actually be more effective. And I'm going to ask you to please go into them.
Thanks. Let me start with the first premise, and that you mentioned the Baltics, I mentioned the Nordics. Actually, maybe this will sound a bit more controversial, but I don't think that everybody should go Nordic/Baltic in Europe. And at the moment, that's the tendency. Everybody says, wow, you have this fantastic system. Wow, how this is prepared, the societal preparedness, you did the leaflets and whatnot. And I would really due to respect, there's so many things to be actually taken from that and probably adjusted. Some of that could be copied. But I think the ethos of all this work should be first and foremost national. Why? Because actually it has to correspond with the natural societal preferences. And that's why I would say we should not go Baltic/Nordic. I think that every society should find what's the mix of that preparedness that will be actually suitable for that society. Because, not everybody has been Poland, not everybody has been Finland and the Finnish, not everybody has the same level of cohesion and the same level of understanding of threats. I think analytically, there is a lot of understanding about this. Quite a few has been written, but in terms of response, then people simply go to, where's the most developed toolbox? That's in the Nordics. Let's take it. Let's copy it. And that was one of the motivations to say, okay, what else could be done? And thank you for really looking at the deep end at the paper. I spoke about the questions that should be asked. What's interesting is actually, and that's one is clear about the militarization versus the readiness to defend themselves. I think still too many European politicians fall into this sort of trap where basically they cannot. Then the next step is what we argue in the second part is then you go guns versus butter. And I have to say, liberal politicians are excellent analyticians. They could say, oh yeah, of course, we have a finite amount of money. And then we have to say, if you want to defense is a human need, then we have to cut the social welfare. Our societies have moved from that point. I'm not saying that you have to make hard choices, but the time of convincing is over. The time of explaining is over. And no wonder that a lot of liberal politicians, their adage is like, oh, I wish if only the voters understand me. No, that's not in the game.
Goran, let me jump in. Sorry to interrupt you, because this is really important. And this is something that I think needs to be included in a larger discussion, because we are in danger of making that mistake that you just mentioned right now, which is not paying attention to everything that people need for their lives, the control of inflation, be able to go to the hospital, be able to take care of their kids. And we saw the result of that, which is an increase in the extreme right, in the populists. So we cannot make that mistake again. I just wanted to add that.
No, absolutely. And I have to say, you say we cannot make that mistake again. I think that mistake has been made in some places. One really has to start correcting, because the focus is on explaining the trade-offs. And look, don't get me wrong, analytically, I would agree 100%, but politically, this doesn't bring you votes. And this is where actually one has to look at what's happening in society. We ask ourselves how individuals will react to this. And I lived for a long period in time in Budapest, and I know quite a bit about Central and Eastern Europeans. And there are positive and negative sides of the 90s and the way how the societies developed, but often, and in particular, the middle class thought about what's there in for me, and in for me as an individual or as my own family, a kind of a selfish bias. Not bad, not good, but different. And I thought, well, if we ask this question about the money and defense, and actually, when you look at the stock exchange, a company, and this is not me, it's Financial Times, that profited the most in the entire world, meaning whose shares have increased from November 4th since Trump was elected, is Rheinmetall.
Yeah,
200, but and everybody thinks. Social Democrats will say, okay, let's tax these excessive profits. It's a legitimate solution. But what if, and this is one of the proposals in the paper, what if this is packaged in a product that is actually offered from post offices to bank branches to ordinary people with a target to, I don't know, maybe not all 80 million Germans, but 10 to 15 million Germans own it. It's protected in a similar way as the savings are protected, so with certain limits, 50,000 or 100,000 euros, which I think for an average family's savings in Europe is fair enough, and then guarantee a profit that will be just above what is the interest rate with some tax, a favorable tax arrangement. And then people will see, as we now do all this with applications, will see each month that their wealth increases. And they will not say, oh, those tank producers, they really amassed a lot of money. They will think, hey, okay, they're probably making more money, but I'm also making a bit, and this actually increases my own savings. And this, in a time where you have reports after reports, I mean, Letta put this amount at 11 trillion euros that sits idle on European accounts. And I know, and if there was an economist here, we'll say, wait a second, you have to have a lot of complexity there. We should not we should not give money for free. There should not be risk-free. I understand that. Actually, France is piloting it now without any tax benefit or without any favorable treatment. But places like Germany and those who are in a better fiscal space could actually afford. But the reason is I'm not arguing for the very specific instrument. I'm arguing for what are the different ways that actually people could feel that this effort is also good for me as in singular or as me as my family, not just the society. I think a lot of conversation is, can't you see that defense is a public good, and then actually it works for all of us? Yes, some people see it, but not everybody. Yeah. And then I will go with the last point that I want to make. A lot has been made about conscription, and conscription, maybe it's a solution in some places more than others, but also conscription does not take into consideration the grain of many societies, where actually we're talking about different social strata. We're talking about different modalities and what actually people are ready to contribute or not. And frankly, when you think about a war, the first thing what you think is like, will I send my kids to fight and die? And then the very natural answer is no. Therefore, no wonder when you see the polls, and Germany just had one earlier this week, and now published by Forza, and actually, no wonder that only 16% of Germans are ready to say that, and a lot of Europeans. But actually, I think what we have to do is really broaden this. And that's why Wojtek and I wrote it, because Wojtek was very much, no, conscription. I was like, I'm not against, but let's think what else is there. The money, the earning, the putting your savings, but also thinking what other efforts I can make without that being ultimate. And I believe in so many countries, this preparedness is a much better thing, because then people will contribute. And also when they contribute, preparedness most of the time happens at the level of a community, at the level of municipality, at the level of your own neighborhood. And then actually you will not need to explain what does it mean. And frankly, to me, these are all issues that has a capital D, as in democratic, because these are actually, these should be the usual tools that the pro-democratic politicians are using into everyday, not only discourse, but everyday policy measures.
Totally agree. Goran, as we're running out of time, I'm going to ask you please to tell us, if people want to know about this topic, and apart from the policy paper that I'm going to put on the show notes naturally, how can they follow your work online?
So my work, the best thing now, since I quit X or X-Twitter.
Thank you for doing that.
Long time ago.
We're not going to talk about Twitter now, but no. Thank you for doing that.
I resorted to LinkedIn, which is not exactly the same type of platform. I do Blue Skies, but LinkedIn is probably the best. And I had also a number of op-eds and as well notes from speaking engagement at conferences. So probably to follow me, the best place will be LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile at the moment.
I'm going to put all the links on the podcast show notes. Goran Buldioski, the policy paper is amazing. Also, thank you to Wojtek Przybylski from Soft to Hard Power. Goran, this was very illuminating and very interesting. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Ricardo. It was a pleasure talking to you.
So, Goran, please tell us a little bit about yourself. What was the path that you took to the point that I have you now on the podcast?
Yeah, thanks, Ricardo. My path is actually quite sort of, I would say, typical for somebody who really decided to invest himself into democracy and democracy promotion, coming from what is now known as Republic of North Macedonia, from Skopje, the capital city. I started in the 90s actually with a lot of youth activism in the times where the country was becoming independent and also building a new, market economy, democratic society, similar as across the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe. And then my activism from the youthful days, I sort of decided to turn into a full-time profession where actually I really joined the exciting world of civil society organizing, first in my home country, then in the Western Balkans, and then afterwards the path led me to studying in the United States, my first graduate degree, and then afterwards working for the Council of Europe in a very exciting times in the Directorate of Youth and Sport. So I dealt a lot with non-formal education and youth policy. And afterwards, I joined Open Society Foundations, where I shifted my attention to think tanks quite a lot, working on policy research in equally exciting times in the 2000s, 2010s, where actually there was a need for policy solutions. And that was really a lot about the technical side of it, and not only, also the political. And then with Open Society Foundations, I had really the privilege to work much broader as a co-director and then director of the European program, where I oversaw large portfolios of more than hundreds and hundreds of civil society organizations, not only think tanks, but including think tanks, first and foremost in Central and Eastern Europe, but then as we branched and also as I moved from Budapest to Berlin, quite a lot in Western Europe too. And that brings me to the current position where I thought, okay, after so many years of management and doing sort of policy work on the sidelines or after midnight, I wanted to have a content job. And now here I am dealing with policy and executive education at Curtis School. The University of Governance in Berlin.
That's a very eclectic path that you took there. But how did you got interested in questions of security, defense, and as we just talked about, shifting?
I have to tell you, that surprised me probably as much as it surprised all of my former colleagues and friends. I actually, I consider myself as an expert on democracy and democracy promotion, and actually that's the angle. And then, looking at the debates of security, which now are so ubiquitous, you cannot avoid them in Europe, I actually noticed that everybody is talking about the guns, everybody is talking about the money, and nobody talks about the people. And also nobody talks about the people in the way of more sort of looking, what can we do as a democracy? And as I spent most of my life looking at that side, and also looking at a lot of innovations, which I still to this very day believe that could be adjusted or applicable in the sense of defense, I was like, wait a second, I think there is a need for this angle. And I started looking for, what's the state of affair there? Where is the public opinion? And then with Wojciech Przybylski from Republika Poland, we had a very enlightening conversation where the two of us were thinking, what were we thinking on the February 23rd, 2022, if we were in Kiev? And then we realized that actually there's a lot to be said, both not only in terms of data, but as well as an emotion when it comes to people's engagement, understanding, solidarity, preparedness. And here I am, I actually pretty much employing what I know into a new field, but I just don't want your listeners to be mistaken. I do not consider myself as an expert on defense. I will stick to the people and leave the guns and money to others.
Well, the more of us working in democracy, the better. This is all for now. I'll be back soon with more podcasts. You can always visit the website liberalforum.eu to know more about the activities of the European Liberal Forum. So until the next episode, let's keep making the world a better place.
You were listening to the Liberal Europe podcast by the European Liberal Forum. This podcast was co-financed by the European Parliament.